everybody, and welcome to the Dissecting Fiction podcast. I'm Vinny Murphy.
And I'm Christiaan Kutlik.
And today on the show, we're going to talk a little bit about kind of current events with DC, a little bit of theorization, a little bit of rumors. This is really going to be about what the possible future for DC Comics may be. We try to do a little more like research and analysis here, but I think what's going on is a little too interesting to not address within time. Don't you agree, Christiaan?
Yeah, this is DC has been in a weird state for like the last 4 years. I'd say ever since like Convergence, things have been really weird. And right now, like 2020 seems like to be a big convergence of all these little like strands they've been having around since like the New 52.
Let's talk a little bit, I guess. It's easier just to kind of get into it. First off, quite a few layoffs took place over the last few weeks. Some have called it a bloodbath, but there's a new editor-in-chief. There's one less interim editor-in-chief, which was kind of a big surprise because usually, if you're doing the kind of co-editor-in-chief thing, you don't expect one of them to outright be fired. It just got very, very sort of tense very quickly, all while a lot of rumors are swirling around what's going on. So new editor-in-chief is Marie Javins, longtime professional in the industry, credited for really bringing together that excellent Hanna-Barbera line that DC had a few years ago, Mark Russell kind of being the breakout writer from that. There are rumors that really a few things are about to happen at DC. One being a big contraction of the line down to maybe around 20 books or so. This is somewhat confirmed. I mean, Jim Lee, still near the head of the company. It gets kind of messy when you start talking about titles. Jim Lee, currently publisher and chief creative officer, has stated that they were going to reduce the line by about 30%. A lot of people are saying it's going to be a lot more drastic than that. A few things that have popped up that are real, that are aligning with rumors. There were rumors that a lot of the big name writers, Jeff Johns, Tom King, once they're done with their current projects, aren't going to be working with DC all that consistently anymore. This was a little bit backed up as an image book for Jeff Johns and Gary Frank just got announced.
Yeah, and the Three Jokers was supposed to be Jeff Johns' big send-off the entire DC franchise in a lot of different ways.
Right, and that's something else too that's really relevant. A huge success. Three Jokers really brought a lot of casual fans into the comic shops, and Three Jokers is not quite in any continuity. If you read it, if you're familiar with most of the main cast of Batman, you can really figure it out. But it's certainly not in the main DCU as it is right now.
Well, no, a lot of things are fitting into the main DCU right now. Not even the event we're largely going to be talking about, Dark Knight's Death Metal, which kind of like out of continuity, but does reference some books here and there. DC's a very odd beast right now, and even the books they do have don't seem to really be building towards anything that big. Even the allegedly big event they have in December, I think Frozen Nights, it doesn't seem to be that big of a deal either. Yeah,
this is really sort of where a lot of these rumors are starting to seem kind of true. It is, and I say this without hesitation, I can't 100% prove it, but I think, as they say, the proof is in the pudding, in this case being the comics that came out. There was a plan for Rebirth. There was a plan for what they were going to do with Wally West. There was a plan for what they were going to do with the Legion. None of this really happened. I think we can say that. We know the Three Jokers also was supposed to be a big part of post-Rebirth continuity, and it got cast off into its own miniseries. I think that's a huge indicator of kind of what's going on. we've seen threads of things since Rebirth that looked like they were going to be the anchors for a new continuity, and not so much that they were ignored, but they never really took hold. I would say over the last year, especially with Bendis, Williamson on Flash, but he always did a great job of making it seem like there were no hiccups. Certainly the Batman books, Doomsday Clock, all of these things all start referencing like crisis type events, and then all kind of end up going in their own direction. A great example is Young Justice ending kind of looking like the Young Justice cartoon and not really explaining much at all.
DC is a really strange state now in that like Dark Knight's death metal really references multiple events, like most prominently into the Year of the Villain, but even that's tied into Doomsday Clock. Doomsday Clock's tied into Hero in Crisis. It's all what's going on right now kind of feels like a culmination of a couple decades worth of storylines and trying to like find out how to kind of somewhat tie it all together and figure out how to lay the groundwork for the future.
The one thing I would say for those who haven't been reading is even that is kind of loose and weird. Like, it's not like they're not directly going for anything in it. I think maybe it's best to sort of address the most recent numbered issue of Dark Knight's death metal. There are a ton of one-shots. They actually have been pretty good. But they start talking about something that they've been using since metal, which is the idea of this crisis energy, obviously a reference to all the other crises that have occurred. This is going to be some spoilers here if you want to read the issue before we go on. But, to skip most of the story, it essentially ends up where the main heroes, first of all, kind of realize that they're not necessarily the main reality, which kind of makes the rest of both metal and death metal make more sense. But it also has this pretty strong meta-narrative about how they just keep going in circles because they keep trying to rebuild the universe, but what if we just let the energy kind of do what it wants to do, and that's how reality is created. I think that's almost definitely an endorsement of these rumors that continuity is going to kind of die off in the DC universe, and it's going to be more about what stories they're telling at the time.
I think even more directly, like for a long time, DC was very set on there's just 52 universes. And out of those 52, those are your realities. That's it. And, Morrison tied it into a bigger meta reality about how there's 52 weeks in a year. But like even more recently, they've expanded like it from like 52 to 53. Now there's like 104. Now there's 156. They just keep infinitely expanding the number of parallel realities possible to the point that it's like, oh, there's not just a multiverse, there's multiple multiverses, and those multiple multiverses make up an omniverse. And it's all kind of culminating in a way of them saying, I think, at the end of this event, whatever may happen, of giving them room to kind of do anything they need to. The bigger issue is how that DC is already releasing books that are out of continuity and not really in continuity with anything else. And DC right now is using Dark Knight Death Metal to wipe the slate completely clean and kind of acknowledge that there might not be any hard and fast rules going forward.
Right. And the funny part is, and I mean, we'll talk about how we feel about this in a bit, but it is somewhat admirable that they're doing this. If they are doing it, it's a guess, but it seems like a pretty strong guess, that they are through a somewhat loose canon miniseries to start.
Yeah, I appreciate what they do have planned in that it kind of leaves room for, like, if something doesn't work out, they're not committed to it, but they're also drawing in elements that will bring in new readers without making it kind of seem as slapdash as the new 52 was. We'll see what happens. it could be, but I think how they're structuring it in the future will lend credence that allow them some wiggle room if something does go wrong.
So, we don't really know what the end of death metal is going to be precisely. There is going to be a one-shot, and forgive me if I mess up a couple of words here, but it is something to the effect of the last stories of the DCU is the name of one of the one-shots. This is another reason that we're thinking probably right on this rumor. Following death metal, though, absolutely is going to be a 2-month break for DC Comics that's going to be called Future State. It's going to tell the story of what, I guess, I don't know. They've kind of implied that it is a hard timeline future of the DCU, but if we don't have a hard timeline, then what does it matter? We're going to see a lot of different versions of characters. It seems like it's kind of an experiment to see if they get good reactions to any of them. But they also announced that the Wonder Girl who will be appearing in these Future State issues is going to be the basis for a CW TV show, at least a pilot.
Yeah, well, we all know if the Batwoman pilot's anything to go by, they'll produce anything.
Yeah. I got into it a little bit about that Batwoman show. I have high hopes with the new lead.
So I guess it kind of just goes straight into like what's going on with Dark Knight's death metal. The premise of it is that the Batman who laughs, who is an evil version of Batman who is infected with Joker gas, and is now Batman plus Joker and plus evil, is in the regular 52 universe. And he was brought here during the original Dark Knight's Metal event. And he was a big bad guy, and he was super powerful. And he basically rewrites the entire universe after the event year of the villain, in which there's a new god called Perpetua, who endowed him with a bunch of powers, and he just remade all the Earths into one evil Earth. And now Wonder Woman, Batman, and Superman have to fight him. And that's generally what's going on.
Yeah, no, that's a way more concise summary than I would have been able to say after reading all of metal and death metal so far. And they did try to make Perpetua into kind of a bigger deal, and it didn't really work in Justice League. I just think it's kind of funny that for as ignored as the Snyder Justice League was, people did come back to death metal. I think it has a lot to do with the aesthetic of death metal, that, the dark multiverse versions of the characters are really cool looking. You get long-haired Superman, like metal. Everyone looks metal. They look very metal. Lobo doesn't change at all, which is totally appropriate. But yeah, if the crisis that they're using is this disorganized, it does worry me a bit of if any of this is sustainable, as far as, like you were saying, this loose idea of continuity where, you're going to kind of pick and choose what counts and what doesn't, kind of injecting alternate timelines, realities into perhaps regular books. Now, I haven't heard of any indication that the books that are shipping twice monthly are going to stop. So, think of it in this way, that you would have, say, 48 issues of Batman comics every year between Detective and Batman, and you were going to play around for, say, 25% of that time. Maybe that can work. I'm just worried they're going to lose the incentive of buying a monthly comic. Continuity, ultimately is meaningless, but it's not from a storytelling point of view, and it's not from, I guess, almost a marketing point of view, that if you have someone reading a comic for 3 years and all of it mattered, they're more likely to read it for that 4th year. It's part of the lesson they learned in the New 52. So many people jumped off at that point because they felt like it wasn't the story they had been reading.
I think even at this point, too, DC has ruined their continuity so many times that I think if there's still any DC fans, it's kind of an expectation going in that what you're reading is probably going to get retconned in like 4 years anyway. and is more about, I think it's slowly over time has become more about the interpretations of these characters rather than like a hard and fast continuity. And I do think that causes problems here and there. I think the biggest example is of Morrison's Batman, who brought in a lot of different ideas and was trying to make a very like concise Batman that stretched across like 80 years. And he did a lot of cool things like put Nightwing in the Batman costume, but that only lasted like maybe a year. And to me, it was always disappointing that they took Nightwing out of the Batman costume so quickly, especially after introducing characters like Damian. Even though Damian's still around, now there's multiple Robins and things like that. I think as a DC fan, you're just used to it. But on the broader scale, I think Warner Brothers and the higher ups and this multi-conglomerate, they owe no loyalty to the comic shops. If they said tomorrow they're going to stop producing comics, it will not hurt their bottom line one bit. And there's only no financial or creative reason that they have to produce comics outside of just kind of like skimming money here and there. I think it's not controversial to say that comic books aren't their biggest business. I think now, especially at Marvel and many of these comic book companies, their biggest business is selling these rights to other companies and making movies out of them and using that to create merchandise, TV shows, and things like that. So it's complicated.
Yeah, I totally agree from that point of view. Like, the corporations are never going to swing in to save comics. I don't think it necessarily kills comics. I think it gives a great advantage to companies like Dark Horse and Image, who are not so tied to that and could really have some real breakouts. I have a feeling that if we are going to see these reduced lines at DC, and then, you know how these businesses work. If DC is in this weird, comfortable position in 6 months, Marvel's going to want to try to do it too. I think it's a real opportunity for other companies to sweep in and take some business. I'm really glad you brought up Dick Grayson as Batman, because I honestly, this is something I've been thinking about. I know he's listened, so I'll name drop my friend Bob once again. We've had discussions about this numerous times. I think one of the biggest mistakes that DC made in the last, I'd go back and say 30 years, and I'll explain that too, was bringing back Barry Allen. Because once that happened, it kind of uprooted all of the work that had been done since Crisis on Infinite Earths to make things both enjoyable to the fans and make more sense. 0 Hour, the Crisis in Time from the early 90s, for those who don't know, rearranged the timeline to allow what was the Earth 2 characters to come into the timeline as World War II heroes and just sort of create this straight line through everything. I'm going to say something here that I think is what bothers me the most about this idea of a really loose continuity. And look, I love out of continuity stories. I love concept stuff. You know, the Frank Miller Dark Knight stuff, especially now after Dark Knight 3 kind of elevated Dark Knight 2 to a better position. You know, some of my favorite Batman stuff ever written. But that mainline continuity, the idea that what happens to these characters matters and that you should be moving forward, was always a huge draw for me. I think it's a draw for a lot of people, and it's certainly a reason to keep buying comics. The return of Barry Allen, to me, is a huge sore point because they had established Wally West so well. And he was the Flash. Like, it wasn't even a question. They had, years and years of Flash comics where it was Wally, and Wally was the proof that you could move on. And I'm not a person who thinks things in comic books should happen in, like, real time. Like, I don't need Bruce Wayne to, like, Bruce Wayne would be dead if he was as old as he was matching his, comic book origins in time. But I think the opportunity to advance time and have it stick is something that the industry killed on its own. And now they're trying to compensate for a mistake they made instead of trying to fix the mistake. Do you understand what I mean? Like, they're trying to, instead of acknowledging their mistake and trying to move forward from it, they're trying to act like the mistake is like part of the mystique of comics. And I think that's kind of bullshit.
I think you can kind of see a similar problem with what they did with Hal Jordan, making him. I mean, I like him as Parallax. I think that was a cool thing they did. But like now you have like maybe 10 different Green Lanterns and all of them are somewhat interchangeable. I think a good example of that would be with Beetle. You know, you have the original Techno Gadget Blue Beetle, and then you have the alien Blue Beetle, but they both share a very similar history in the comic books.
Yeah, I would agree that I'm also a huge Blue Beetle fan. I mean, I have a print right now in my apartment of Booster Gold and Blue Beetle pointing and laughing at whoever's looking at it. Bringing back Ted Kord was a mistake. It's a less obvious mistake because, quite frankly, less people are going to care. But I totally agree with that. The Hal Jordan one to me is a little different just because that was like a redemption story and it reestablished the Green Lantern Corps. I don't mind there being like 15 Green Lanterns running around because that's part of the story. And I would say the same for the Death and Return of Superman because that was like a planned arc. Like, you can't get into the reign of the Superman and not know that Superman is coming back. But that's a much tighter story. Like, it's not insulting when it's like one little arc. And yeah, the Hal Jordan thing is absolutely debatable. I tend to lean on okay, I'm all right with this one. But Ted Kord, Barry Allen, I think are kind of real good examples of where they took away any of the gravity that they could have had. Even Damian coming back to a certain extent. Jason Todd, as much as the Red Hood paid off ultimately, it did really change the way you looked at the role of Robin from before. When, there was a dead Robin, it made Batman like kind of a different character for a while.
Yeah, and this is also again a part of how DC always resets the continuity too, and that like there's a weird sense that not much matters when you're ultimately reading these long form comics at DC. I mean, they have like big events, but my favorite Wonder Woman, which was the new 52 one, just doesn't exist. Like that's not a thing that's even referenced anymore.
Yeah, Marvel's an interesting case with continuity too. Like, from the beginning, and largely because they never. I shouldn't say never. Secret Wars, to a certain extent, was kind of a crisis-like event, but they just kind of keep rolling. And like whenever people want to use something, not unlike Last Remain's story that's running in Amazing Spider-Man right now, they can. It's not as tidy, and it takes writers like Hickman to kind of like step back and try to make it all make sense, and it still doesn't quite make sense. But I think it's dangerous to the form to drop some semblance of continuity. I don't think that DC is going to do it entirely, but I think if something takes off that's like a side concept at first, like we could lose characters really quick, and it's just hard. It's hard to think about reading monthly comics in a consistent form without knowing that it's gonna even like have an attempt to matter. And like I get the argument that like no, it doesn't really matter, and for years they've been kind of screwing it up, but like sometimes that effort that they put in to try to fix it like is what re-engages readers.
Yeah, I think you see it most recently with like, the X-Men comics, even Death Metal here, and several other events like in the last 2 years that really brought in a bunch of new readers. But I think the bigger, I kind of disagree with you that I think they are kind of going to start scrapping continuity, because mostly they're like, when we talked about the DC fandom, they talked about a big push going to digital comics, and one of their big digital comics is going to be a Harley Quinn comic. So I kind of think they're using this opportunity to kind of workshop a lot of different ideas and kind of like refine what they want out of certain characters and even what type of characters they want. At Death Metal, they're surely going to wipe the slate clean and they're going to have Future Slate. And in Future Slate, we already have tons of different characters that are like first appearances, like, you know, a Black Batman, a Black Flash, well, another Black Flash, the daughter of Aquaman and Mira, you know, a Brazilian Wonder Woman. I think they're using this as an opportunity to workshop all kinds of different ideas and not necessarily use it to commit to something. But I do agree with you that it will kind of lose the appeal of comics in the form of superhero comics and its continuity. Because that appeal is that, you know, what happened in Batman #1 matters to Batman 1050, you know.
Yeah, you know, and yes, you know, before the comment is made, you know, there was that real harsh shift from the Golden Age to the Silver Age for DC, and everyone's like, oh, well, that worked. But, you know, I think it is very different now, especially just how long the characters have been around and how there has been at least somewhat of a line you can follow. And also the fact that, you know, so many things are getting adapted from these comics. You know, I think we've really kind of like expressed like our feelings on it. But the one last thing I want to say is, you know, a lot of the change that editorial is attempting to make is to try to engage new readers and make sure that the characters that are on the page are reflective of, you know, contemporary society. I think continuity is the best way to do that, simply because, you know, as you're saying, you know, Wally West was the Flash. We had very quickly Dick Grayson as Batman, who would have had a totally different attitude as Batman. And if everything that happened mattered, you know, we could be at the point where we have Wally West kids as the Flash. Like, we could be at all these different points, and people got cold feet with it. And I think that's part of the reason I don't like the idea of moving away from continuity, is because it's not only this idea to like workshop an idea, as you were saying, but it's also a way to throw out something if you get too uncomfortable with it.
Yeah, and DC is especially good about that.
Yeah.
Like, even the existence of Doomsday Clock not really changing anything. Like, I don't even know like how you build stories out of this instead of like in building like interpretations of these characters, because I feel like that's kind of what it's going to go down to, is like there's going to be a bunch of different interpretations of these characters and not really one solid vision of the character. In that, like, you know, there's a core you can kind of build off of. There's just going to be several different interpretations. It's going to be weird. Like, for a while there, DC was very big into the legacy characters, and now has reversed, and Marvel's super into the legacy characters.
Right, and I think, to me, DC was at their strongest when they were involved with the legacy characters. They made it stand out amongst pretty much everything else that was getting published at the time. But and I think you're right. There is that corporate mentality, and there's definitely, you know, we've talked about this on the show. There's 100% of mentality right now at Warner Brothers that the version of the character on screen isn't quite as important as getting out versions of the characters that people like. That's fine, and I think it actually works really well with film, TV, things like that. Comics, I think, at this point only exist because of their legacy, and I'm just a little afraid that you could really screw things up at this point.
If you look at the biggest comics in like the last 10, maybe 15 years, a lot of them are weird, like legacy comics, and that like I mentioned before, Grant Morrison's Batman is all about Batman. You know, Jeff Johns' Green Lantern is all about the legacy of the Green Lantern. Even like more recent events like the X-Men Hickman reboot, that's all about like reconciling this weird continuity for a lot of these characters. And I do kind of see DC's point in that it kind of feels like they hit a wall with telling these stories about these characters in a certain way. And I don't know. I hope they kind of go more with the legacy characters. I hope they come up with a more consistent like world building thing. Like when they did Convergence, they kind of said they were going to bring in the Sandman characters. They never did. They were going to bring in, John Constantine, and they kind of did, and then they got full cold feet and they pulled him right back out. And it's just this weird state where like nothing ever feels like you can build a story out of, and that was always the appeal of like it's comic X-Men. He was building out of like what Stan Lee originally wrote.
I think the message here that we both pretty much agree on is pick something sustainable as opposed to picking everything or nothing.
Yeah, we talked quite a lot about this comic and about what this comic's going to do, but physically reading this event has been exhausting. It felt like it's been going on a million years because there's a million one-shots, and like the first 2-3 issues were fucking great. They were really cool, they were really metal, and then it immediately lost all its steam once like the guidebook came out. And they were cool one-shots like the Robin King stuff, but like goddamn, if I had to hear one more time about like hope, and we should focus on hope and how they'll have hope and that they'll defeat the hope and win with hope. And then I have to hear one more time that the Flashes are running out of energy again. Like they've been running out of energy for 6 fucking months now. It has to run out at some point.
Yeah, we've talked about this in the past in the New 52 episode specifically, that Snyder can be great, and when he tries to do big stories, he often just kind of stretches them out way too long.
The Swamp Thing Raw World is a great example of that.
Yeah, I would say 0 Year might be the best. I felt like I was in the 0 Year for 4 years, but yeah, I feel like it is kind of ready for sort of a boost, but I don't know. I'm just scared about this whole thing at this point.
Well, is there anything you're looking forward to in future slate?
I mean, future state. I'm actually really interested, kind of across the board. I just kind of want to see what it is. Yeah, no, I can't even think of anything really specific that I'm excited for. I'm just really gonna kind of go into it with an open mind and hope it's cool.
I'm excited for the Red X stuff specifically because they're finally acknowledging the Teen Titan cartoon exists.
Yeah, I thought that was cool. That'll be a cool design for cosplayers too. They'll enjoy that.
Yeah, but I guess the one comic I'm not looking forward to is another Harley Quinn future slate, because it's like, I don't know, it's Harley Quinn with like a neon baseball bat. Like, what's the appeal here?
That's the future. Things are neon in the future.
But she doesn't even have like a jetpack. At least Batman Beyond had like jet boots.
That's true. I mean, maybe she does. We don't know what's going to happen. There's like, what, 4 issues? Well, anyway, there you go. We're just horrified and scared about what DC's going to do. Maybe it'll be good. Who knows? That's probably it, right, Christian?
Yeah, I think so. I just hope they incorporate, like, they actually get a clear fucking idea of what they want to do going into this, because it's been 10 years.
You hear that, Jim Lee? He didn't hear that. He's a really nice guy. I met him. He was super, super nice. Jim Lee, you're great.
I don't think it's any of these writers' fault. I think it's editorials and whatever like businessman they have, just snapping like these decisions.
See, that's worrisome too. Yeah, I don't know, but we should stop. We're just gonna get more and more depressed. If you've enjoyed this small brain trust we have going on what could possibly happen with a rumor, feel free to follow us on pretty much all social media. Just type in Dissecting Fiction. You'll find us. We're not hard to find. However you are listening to this, like, subscribe, rate, comment, whatever you think is going to be the most helpful to us. You know what to do. You've been given instructions from numerous podcasts, numerous YouTube shows. You know how to do this. If you are in the market for some cool toys, statues, things of that like, check out toystoreguide.com. They're going to lead you to some great local independent businesses. They really need your business right now, as do all independent businesses in your community, so make sure that you're checking those out. For now, I'm Vinny Murphy.
And I'm Christian Catholic.
And thanks for listening.